Hey guys, welcome back to Professional Weekenders YouTube channel. Today we're in the garage and today we are going to be replacing the axle on my 2016 Toyota Tundra. Alright guys, so what's going on here is I've got a bad wheel bearing. In my rear wheel bearing on the passenger side, some of the grease from the wheel bearing has come out and has covered up my wheel speed sensor. So that means on my dash now I'm getting my TPS and ABS lights are on constantly. So I need to replace that wheel bearing. It's about a $30 part, but in order to do the work on that, you need a press, you need some special tools from Toyota. All that starts to get fairly expensive. I don't have any of that. You can make your own tools if you have a welder. I don't have a welder. I have no idea how to weld. I'd like to learn someday, but not today. So I went around to a couple shops to try to get some estimates on what this is going to cost. One shop said they'd do it for about $300, but they said that the axle was too large for their press and that they couldn't do it. Went to another shop. They wanted to replace the entire axle assembly. And they said, you know what? While you're at it, you might as well replace the other axle assembly too. Oh, and by the way, while we're in there, we're going to do this. It just got to be too much. They ended up wanting $5,000. This truck is only worth like $15,000. So $5,000, that ain't happening either. Especially for them to replace the axle assembly. Because I looked it up, that axle assembly should be able to be replaced in about an hour and a half. So you're talking 3 hours worth of work, $1,000 worth of parts, and you're going to charge me $5,000? That doesn't make sense. So that's more than $1,000 an hour that they're going to charge for this. This is crazy. Anyways, I went and I bought the parts myself. The parts that we got are sitting right here in front of me. We'll go over here in just a minute, but they were right around $500. I did have some troubles getting one, particularly the one I needed. It's just been out of stock, and with these supply chain issues, I've been waiting like 3 months. I haven't been able to drive this truck because of it. But finally it came in today, so super excited about that, and we'll go ahead and get started on that. Alright guys, so here's what we're looking at. This side is the driver's side. This is the old one that I already did replace, so it's a little bit gunky. And this is the brand new passenger side. This is the one I was having trouble with that's installed in the car, so I haven't gotten to install this yet. I just kind of want to show you what you get in the box, what to expect here. So this is the Dorman 962-144. So that is the one I need for my truck. That's for the passenger side. For the driver's side, it was the 962-143. I have the 4.6 liter V8. If you have the 5.7, you need to step that up a little bit. The axles are a little different. I guess it's a little longer on the 5.7. So if you have the 5.7, you need the 962-145 and 146. But double check that with your parts supplier before you order. So this right here is the wheel bearing. This is the part that has failed on my truck. The bearings are actually down inside of here. It's all sealed up. So the nice thing about ordering it as an assembly like this is everything comes already assembled. It's already all pressed and everything's in place. I don't really have to do anything with it, but just unbolt the old one and bolt the new one on in its place. So it really is just a few bolts. I think the trickiest part is going to be the parking brake, and we'll cover that when we get to it. I got through it on the other side. It's not too bad. A couple things to note though about this is I did already notice when I did the first one that these holes here, these are where the caliper attaches, and these are too small on these Dormans for whatever reason. See, it's not far off, but these are probably about 1/4 inch holes. They need to be 9/16. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to drill these out to 9/16. I had to buy a special drill bit to get that. And then another thing is this is the bracket here that holds on the brake line. It's the Toyota recommended way is to unhook the brake line and bleed, reconnect it and bleed your brakes. I don't want to do all that. Most cars don't have to do that. Most trucks don't have to do that. So what they typically do is, in most other cars, I'm trying to get this thing here out of the way. What they do in most cars and trucks is there's actually a slit right here on this side that allows you just to slide in and out the brake line, and there's a clip that's already on there you're going to need that'll still hold it in place. So that's what I did on the other side, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to make a notch out of this as well to allow that brake line to slide in and out. The only other thing that you get with the kit here, you see you get this bearing seal, as well as a gasket there. So everything you really need, not too much. I think the only, obviously you need some tools and some high temperature grease. With that being said, let's get started. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drill out these holes to be 9/16. So just go slow. All right, next up we're going to take that little notch out of here. Got my cutoff wheel. Not much to it. That's all you need to take off. So I'm just going to clean this up real quick. Get the vacuum, pick up all those shavings. All right, and finally we're just going to give it a quick hit of some black spray paint just to kind of cover and protect those new exposed pieces of metal that we opened up. Taped off the bearings, so shouldn't get any paint in there. All right, next up we're going to go ahead and remove the wheel. Got a ratchet here. This is a 22, I think. Yeah, 22 millimeter. I'm going to need to add a breaker bar to this too because they're on there tight. So we just got the truck just a little jacked up. It's not all the way off the ground yet, so I haven't installed my jack stands yet. Just kind of working on getting it that way. And I'm going to use the handle from the jack stand to give me a little bit extra leverage on this. All right, so we got it up on jacks now, or we got it up on the jack stands. Now we can finish taking the tire off. That wasn't too bad compared to the other side. Next up, we're going to hit this caliper here, this rotor here with a little bit of WD-40. I had some trouble getting the other side off. It was really seized on there. So basically all these little holes are going to go down into that axle. All right, we'll let that set while we take care of the caliper here. All right, so now we're looking at the back of the caliper here. This is the brake line. Like I said, there's that little clip that we need to take off. Here's the caliper. These are the two bolts here, one down there. We can take off. We're gonna start with the brake line. It's a little easier on the other side because I'm right-handed, but the idea is you just kind of work it up. All right. So now we can move this out of the way. And just pull it forward a little bit. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make that same notch here on this one. Just be real careful. You don't want to cut this brake line. Because we're going to toss out this old one, we only have to make one slit and then we just kind of bend it out of the way. Not quite. Alright, so that's one of the most nerve-wracking parts. But once you get through that, you're all good. And like I said, we just kind of bend this whole thing here out of the way. Alright, there we go, and it's free. The next up, we're going to take these two bolts off here, one there, then one down here. These are 19, no, not that one, it's this one, here and here. So we're going to take these two bolts off, 19 millimeters. Alright, as we take this caliper off, I got the last bolt on here, just take that off. So as we take this last bolt here off the caliper, it's real important that we don't put any stress on this brake line. So sometimes you can get like a little wire hanger and hang it from the frame here, or I'm just going to set mine on the stool until we're done. So got it taken off. It's kind of seized on there a little bit, so there we go. So we'll just set that over here. So it's nice and safe. Just like on the other side, my rotors here are shot. They are rusted so bad. So I had to replace the rotor on the other side. I was, obviously going to replace both at this point, but yeah, so when you're in here, it's a good time to do a brake job too while you're at it. Let's see if this rotor is seized on there, and yeah, sure enough it is. So since I'm not going to save the rotor, I'm not going to save the axle, all I'm really want to save is just the parking brake that's inside. I'm just going to get a hammer and knock this thing here off. Finally got that sucker off. Last thing here before we move on to the front. This is the parking sensor here. It's held on by one 10 millimeter there. This is also the emergency brake line. It's also held on by one 10 millimeter there. We'll leave that one on for a moment. We'll come back to it, but I do want to go ahead and get this parking sensor here, or not the parking sensor, the wheel speed sensor out of the way. It smells like grease already. Alright, so then with that loose, we should just be able to pop it out. And you see how gunked up that is. It stinks. And you see that it's all covered with grease. That's the problem. Now you can buy these from the Toyota dealer, and they're pretty expensive. I don't remember exactly how much, but I know I found them online, I think at carparts.com for like $30, $35 for a pair. You know, a single one from Toyota will cost you way more than that, so set that aside and try to tuck it somewhere where it's not going to get damaged. Alright, so here's what we got on the front side. So these are the parking brakes. They are held on by these little numbers here, that they're springs that you have to compress and then twist the inside there 90 degrees. So that part is difficult. You're definitely going to need some help for that. They also have two springs. There's one up here. You can see that back in there. And then there's another one down here. So to remove this, you want to remove these two springs first. And then this adjustment screw here should come out, as well as this is the part that actually holds the brake cable in. And then the brakes will just kind of be hanging there by their little mounting springs, and so get those off last. So next we'll move on to these. So the idea is just to compress them and then get somebody to turn that centerpiece for you. So actually it looks like, yeah, I just went ahead and wiggled this so you can actually go ahead and get this piece here off now. So it just opens up there, and then you should be able to slide the cable there on off. Definitely putting them on as a two-man job, but maybe if you get them off by yourself. I got one already. This one's definitely the tougher one because it's kind of hidden behind the axle or the wheel hub here. We struggled through it, but we got it done. Basically, these are your parking brakes. Remember that the thick side goes on the bottom when you reassemble, the thin side goes up top. Okay, and then that just comes off. So now we can take the parking brake cable here off. So again, that's just a 10mm. Oh, and then we need to take these ones off too. I forgot about those. So let's see what those are, maybe 18s. So these are, in fact, 17s. That's what I meant. I have to bend that one there further back. Now that we've gotten this out of the way. Now the parking brake cable slides out. It's a little stiff. And then the front piece should pull off. I maybe need to give it a little bit of help. A little tappy tap. Okay. And so there's the front part of the parking brake. Here's the bit that holds the cable in place. We'll put the nuts back on there so we don't lose those. All right, almost there. So last thing before we can remove is the 4 bolts here. And I think those 17s, yeah. So more 17s. And then once we get that off, we should just be able to pull it straight out. Alright, so then that's all it is to getting it removed. There's still the bearing seal that'll just come right out, but since I got it out of the car, I want to take a closer look at it, and you guys probably want to see this too. So this is the bearing here. You can see how much of that bearing grease is shot up in there, and you can hear it. Do you hear how chunky that is? It's exactly the problem I was having. I could hear it when I was driving too. I mean, obviously it's in bad shape. See, this is the one from the driver's side. It's a lot smoother. So this one was probably fine. Probably didn't have to remove this one. But again, just the shop I went to initially to have them do it, they were going to do both sides anyways. I mean, I'm covered in grease. All right, so getting that out, it's not too bad. Now we're going to put it back together. And again, it's about just as difficult getting it back together. It's not difficult at all. The hardest part is just those clips that hold the parking brake on. But before we get to putting the new one on, we do have to finish up with the bearing seal here. So here's where that rubber piece goes. It goes on the outside, the gasket, and then here's the bearing seal. And you can see again how much grease is caked on this thing. Get a little bearing seal puller here. Oh, it flung grease everywhere, so that was fun. All right, and we'll just clean that all up with a paper towel. Make sure everything's nice and clean. We're gonna put new grease on it. All right, if yours comes like mine, it's real important that this little spring thing goes here on the inside of this rubber. On the other one, it was already in place there, but this one here, let's just shook loose in shipping. Okay, so just like that. So now we'll just get some grease here, and we'll just grease this whole thing up. All right, and put some here on the inside as well. For this next piece, it works a lot better if you have one of these bearing tools here. This is a 72 millimeter. You can do it with a, without, and maybe with a block of wood or something, but you got to get it recessed, so you're going to struggle kind of pretty much no matter what. But the key is just get it lined up and then just tap it in there. Yeah, see, even then it's not going straight. Finally got it figured out. Just a ton of grease, and it finally went straight. There it goes. Next up is the gasket, and you just want to make sure that you got some grease on that too. And it just goes right on around there. So there we go. Next up, we'll install the axle. So you don't need any grease on this because it's going right into the differential, and that's got a bunch of diff fluid in it already. Not really much to it. You just slide it in. The hardest part is just gotta make sure it's perfectly straight. There's a couple like pieces down in the diff there that kind of make sure that it's straight. And if it's not perfectly straight, it won't go through. Alright. So you see we're getting it close. And so you get to this point and you're going to have just a little bit of a gap there. So we're going to just put the bolts on, or the nuts on, and tighten it down in like a crisscross pattern to get it flush in there. The last little bit, it needs to push the gears in. Alright, and now we just got to torque them down to spec. So these get 44 foot-pounds. So 44 foot-pounds, the parking brake cable gets 62 brake pounds, and the calipers 123 foot-pounds. So we'll start with these with 44. All right. So next up is the parking brake cable holder. So slide that back through. So, like I said, 62 foot-pounds on this one. Alright, there we go. While we're at it, might as well go ahead and install the brake line again. So remember, that just goes down inside and like that. Get our push fit, and it kind of goes in there with the springy side in. went ahead and installed the parking brake cable first, and just the one bolt there, and the torque on that is just, I don't know, it's like 7 foot-pounds or something, so just do it tight, but not very tight. Alright, there we have it. So now that's back installed. We'll go ahead and install our wheel sensor. And it's super important that on that wheel speed sensor you get the stud too off the old axle, so that unscrews and then you can put that on there. And then you just put the nut on there and torque it down to 5 foot-pounds. With such a low amount of torque, I'd, again, just put it on there tight. That wraps up the back until we get to the caliper. Back to the parking brake. So there's a couple raised spots on this dust shield. Looks like there's maybe 6 of them. Those areas you do want to hit with just a little bit of high temperature grease. Those are the spots where your parking brake are going to be rubbing. So just get a little bit on there, smear it on there. Don't want to go too crazy because, obviously it's not good to have grease on your brakes. So you don't want to get on the brake faces, but just a little bit on there. The other spot with your brakes that you're going to want to hit with grease when we get to it will be the ends of the I don't know what you call this, like this little buckle thing, right, that holds the cable. So those parts that slot into the brakes, you're going to want to hit those with grease, as well as on the underside. So I got a new hardware kit, so the adjustment screw on the other side would be here, and then the other end. Next up is actually putting the brakes back on. So for this, it's definitely better to have 2 hands, 3 hands, 2 heads. The idea behind this, the way that this works, is this little pin here slides into the back, pops out through the front. The parking brake goes onto the pin. Then you put the spring over top of that. So this little end cap goes on there, and then the pin needs to be rotated 90 degrees, and that will lock it in place. So you got to do that while this whole thing's under compression. Of course, there's a special tool for this, but if you just have a third hand, you don't need to buy the tool. So I'm gonna go get my lovely assistant. Yeah, so that is definitely a pain, like I mentioned. Definitely better if you have 3 hands. So basically I just pushed on this thing and fed the pin through, and then Christine came out with a pair of needle nose pliers and grabbed a hold of that and twisted it. It was too much to try to film with the GoPro because we just needed all the room that we could get. So unfortunately we didn't get any close-ups of it, but stick it in, turn it 90 degrees. It's not a difficult concept, it's just hard to do because it's so tight. Moving on. So next we're going to install the, again, I don't know what this thing's called, the parking brake lever. They do go on differently depending on if you're a left hand or right hand side. So for this side, this is the right hand side, and I remember it came off this direction. And before we slide that on there, like I mentioned, do want to get just a little bit, do want to get just a little bit of grease, high temperature grease, and put it right there in that crevice. Over here on this side too. So, because that's going to rub up against the brake pads and push them apart. So we just feed that cable through there and get it latched in. Alright. And then, I just touched the brake pad with a handful of grease. Don't do that. Alright, next up is the bottom brake adjuster. So this is the part that's going to adjust how stiff your brakes are. So start with it all the way tightened down so it's the loosest on the brakes. And then we'll adjust it up as needed. So again, put a little bit of grease in there in the ends. Alright, And then this goes down here on the bottom edge. Maybe I need to adjust it out a little bit. It's not even gonna fit in there. Now we're all done with the grease. Oh yeah. In case I didn't mention, obviously I bought a new hardware pack. So that's why all the springs and everything look new. Big spring goes on top, small spring goes on the bottom. I do find this is easier if you've got a curved pick, so let me grab one of those. Put the small one first, but the idea is you hook it in there, get this little curved pick, help drag it back across. So the bottom one's the small one. It's definitely the easier one to do. Alright, and then if you need to, you can get a pair of pliers to kind of finish the job. Make sure it gets all the way in there. Now for the top, let me see this a little bit better. But the idea is put it in one side and then pull. The top one's definitely a lot harder. You need more leverage. I don't even know if you can see anything. My hands are just in the way. Here she is. If it doesn't work one way, go the other way. And just slide it in with the pair of pliers. There we go. Next up are the rotors. Because I bought brand new rotors, got to clean them. They have factory grease on. Make sure you get down inside there. And hit the other side too. Alright, one thing you're going to need to salvage from your old rotors, there's this plug that allows you to adjust the parking brake. What you do is this little adjustment tensioner down here. If you expand that outward, I think it's down on this side. If you expand that outward, it'll push these brakes out apart, and that's going to push up against the inside of your rotors on your drum. So I think the idea is to kind of get it to the point where the brakes are so spread apart that the rotor doesn't fit, and then just back it off a little bit from there. Yeah, you can see how tight that is. So that's pretty much perfect where we want to start, and then we'll just back it off a little bit. Still, it's a little too tight. Alright, so we got the rotors on to where they just barely fit on, and they still, still move a little bit, so the brakes aren't locked up. Last thing is just this little plug that came off of the old set of rotors. And that's just so that adjustment screws in there. If you need to make any adjustments without taking the whole rotor off, you can do that right there. Particularly if the brakes are locked up and you can't get the rotor off, you can loosen them from there. Alright. Now we got to do brake pads. Because we got new rotors, we're going to get new pads. So take one of the old ones off, leave this one in for just a moment, because the way that I do this here. Alright, so an easy way to compress your brakes is leave the old pad in there, because you're going to destroy it, and put the C-clamp on there kind of like this, and you can just tighten it down. And so what you want to do is to compress the cylinders here, because your new pad's going to be thicker than your old pad, so you need all the room you can possibly get to get these things back over top of the rotors when you get the new pads in there. So it's a lot easier than having to bleed your brakes. Alright, so that's as far as it goes. Alright, so then remove the old pad, get rid of the old hardware that's in here. So now the new brake pads come with new hardware. Make sure you get some special brake lubricant for these as well. And so basically you want to lube up the areas there where the brake shoes are going to be rubbing. So do that for all four sides. And then just slide them in place. Sometimes these things can be a little bit of a pain, but really these ones go on pretty easy. And the only thing to remember is this little tab here has to go to the outside. So they are directional specific. Brake pads. So they go curved side up. But other than that, there's not really, you know, they're interchangeable between the two of them. And these ones go in so easy too. I've had so many other brakes that they'll fight you the whole time. All right, easy enough. So now we just got to put the caliper bolts back on. So just make sure that we got all the space that we can possibly get out of these calipers. So I don't even know if you can see it. Yeah, so it's on there. Go ahead and put our bolts in. Remember that we had to drill these out to make them fit. So now they fit just fine. Just gotta get lined up with the hole. And then that'll be 123 foot-pounds on these. And there you have it. One new axle installed. Just gotta put the tire on. So the wheel goes on there with, if you have alloys, it's 97 foot-pounds of torque. And that'll do it. So pretty much everyone knows how to put a wheel on. Alright guys, so here's your pro tips for installing the axle on your Toyota Tundra. Say number one, if you want to double check those foot-pound measurements, I got all that from techinfo.toyota.com. That's the website where all the mechanics get their information. Obviously, I'm not a mechanic. I just here in my garage. It is a paid subscription, so it's $20 for a 2-day membership, and that's should be long enough just to go in and download all the papers that you need, but be aware that it's quite a bit of downloading. Pro tip number two is make sure that you have the right tools. I highly recommend a torque wrench. I know that they're fairly expensive. At least get one in the larger size, so that way you can downgrade the sockets and use them for smaller ones if you want. So definitely recommend a torque wrench. Pro tip number three is just be real careful with those bearing seal. With the bearing seals. You saw that I bent mine. The other side went on much easier, but this side I really kind of struggled with. And so if you need to get a new one, I ran down to the local AutoZone and they had them for about $13. You could probably get them online a little bit cheaper, but I wanted one tonight. So that's going to do it for today. Remember, like, share, comment, subscribe. Let us know in the comments below. Are there any tips or tricks that I missed on doing this? Like I said, I'm not a mechanic. I'm sure there's some mechanics out there that have tons of extra info that they can share with us. Put all that comments down below. Any other questions that you have, put in the questions down below. May try to answer it if I have the knowledge. So, and with that being said, we're out of here and we'll see you next weekend. And it's not plugged in. Well, I can't tell if I'm dirty or if the camera's dirty. I think it's both. All right, and finally we're gonna give it just a quick shit. It's a little hot. Okay.
You're coming straight.
Yeah, I mean, as straight as I can get. I don't think it really matters.
That's how you try to freaking edit it.